My name is Yusuf. I am 55 years old. And I'm going to tell you something that still makes my chest tight when I think about it. I don't know how to start this. I have tried many times. I have sat down with a cup of tea, opened my notebook, and stared at the blank page. Then I close the notebook and walk away. Because how do you find the right words for something like this? How do you explain to someone that everything you believed your whole life turned out to be different from what you thought? How do you tell people that you saw something with your own eyes that your own mind still struggles to accept, even now, years later? But I have to tell it. I have to say it out loud, or at least write it down, because carrying it alone is too heavy. And maybe someone reading this needs to hear it. Maybe someone out there is going through the same confusion I went through, and my story will help them feel less alone. So here it is. The truth. My truth. I was born in a city in Saudi Arabia. I grew up in a home where Islam was everything. My father prayed 5 times a day without missing even once. My mother wore her covering with pride. The Quran was the first book I ever read, and my father made sure I memorized long portions of it before I was 10 years old. I went to Islamic school. I grew up knowing that being a good Muslim was the most important thing a person could do with his life. I never questioned this. Not once. It was like asking me to question breathing. I got older. I got married. My wife, Samira, came from a family just like mine. Good people. Quiet people. People who feared God and tried to live right. We had children. I worked hard at my job. I prayed. I fasted during Ramadan every year. I gave money to the poor. I did everything right. And I was proud of that. Not in a bad way, I just felt like I was on the correct path, and that feeling was very comfortable. But I want to be honest with you. Even with all that, there was always something missing. I could never name it. I did not even let myself think about it too much. But sometimes at night after prayers, I would lie in bed and feel this quiet emptiness. Like I had done everything required of me, but I still felt far away from God. Like I was knocking on a door that never opened. I told myself this was normal. I told myself I just needed to pray more, fast more, be better. So I kept trying. For decades, I kept trying. Then I went to Mecca. It was during the last 10 days of Ramadan. This is the most important time of the Islamic year. I had been to Mecca before, twice, but never during Ramadan. A friend helped me get the permission to go. I traveled with my brother Rashid, who is 3 years younger than me, and 2 men from our local mosque whose names I will not share for their safety. We arrived in the evening and went straight to the Grand Mosque to do the tawaf, which is the walking around the Kaaba 7 times as part of the ritual. The Grand Mosque during Ramadan is something you cannot describe unless you have been there. There are millions of people. Millions. From every country, every language, every background. All in white. All moving in the same direction. All saying the same prayers. The Kaaba sits in the middle, this large black cube covered in gold writing, and when you see it for the first time, or even the 5th time, it takes your breath away. I had seen it before, but that night, standing there with the crowd pressing around me and the sound of a million voices praying, I felt something deep in my chest. A kind of awe that is hard to explain. We spent the next several days in the mosque. We prayed. We read Quran. We broke our daily fast together in the evenings with the large community meals. The spiritual feeling was stronger than anything I had experienced in years. I felt close to God in a way I rarely felt at home. I thought maybe this is it. Maybe this is what I have been missing. Maybe I just needed to be here, in this holy place, with all these believers around me. On the night of the 27th of Ramadan, everything changed. This night is called Laylat al-Qadr, the night of power. Muslims believe this is the night the Quran was first given to the Prophet Muhammad. It is considered the most holy night of the entire year. The mosque was so full that night that my group could not get inside. We found a spot in one of the large outdoor courtyards, which is still part of the mosque area. There were hundreds of thousands of people around us. The evening prayer had just finished and we were getting ready for the long night prayers that would go until very late. The imam leading the prayers in our section was a man named Sheikh Khalid Al-Hamdan. I want to take a moment to describe this man because it matters for you to understand who he was before I tell you what he did. Sheikh Khalid was around 60 years old. He had a long white beard and wore the traditional white thawb and red and white headscarf. He had been a respected Islamic scholar for over 30 years. He was known all over Saudi Arabia as a man who never spoke carelessly, who followed Islamic teaching strictly, who did not allow any emotion to make him say something outside of what the religion permitted. He was not a man who would ever do something strange or dramatic. That was not who he was. We began the prayers. The sheikh was leading, reciting from the Quran in a clear and steady voice. Everything was normal. People were focused. The atmosphere was serious and spiritual. We moved through the prayer positions together, standing, bowing, going down to the ground with our foreheads touching the earth. We were all with our heads down, in the position called sujud, when I heard the sheikh stop speaking. He just stopped. Mid-sentence. Mid-verse. Just silence. At first, I thought maybe something had happened with the microphone. But I could hear other sounds. The rustle of clothing. Someone coughing nearby. The distant sound of prayers from another section of the mosque. The microphone was working. The sheikh had simply stopped. The silence lasted longer than it should have. People started to lift their heads. I lifted mine. And when I looked in the direction of where the sheikh was standing, I saw something I will never forget as long as I am alive. Sheikh Khalid was standing completely still. His arms were at his sides. His face was turned slightly upward, like he was looking at something above the crowd. His face was completely white. His mouth was hanging open. His eyes were so wide that from where I was standing, I could see the whites around his eyes. And the expression on his face was like nothing I had ever seen on a human face before. It was not the face of someone who is sick. It was not the face of someone who is confused or scared in a normal way. It was the face of someone who was seeing something. Something overwhelming. Something that was breaking him open from the inside. Then he spoke. His voice came through the speakers. Shaking. But clear. Very clear. He said, I can see him. I can see Isa al-Masih. I can see Jesus the Messiah. He is here. He is standing in front of me. He is real. I felt the air leave my lungs. Around me, people were frozen. For 1 second, maybe 2, nobody moved. Then it was chaos. People started shouting. Some people were screaming. Some people grabbed the people next to them. Some people fell to the ground. Children were crying. People were pushing in every direction, some trying to move toward the sheikh, some trying to run away. The sheikh kept talking. His voice was louder now, stronger, even though his whole body was shaking. He said he could see wounds on the hands of Jesus. He said Jesus was telling him that he was the way and the truth and the life. He said that salvation was not about works and prayers and rituals. He said he had been teaching wrong. He said Isa was not just a prophet. He was the Son of God. He was the Savior. He kept talking, faster and faster, his voice full of something I can only call desperate honesty. Like a man who has just discovered that his whole house was built on sand and is trying to warn everyone before it fell. Then I saw the security men. They came from multiple directions at the same time, pushing through the crowd with force. They reached Sheikh Khalid and they grabbed him. He did not fight them. He did not try to run. He just kept saying what he was saying, his voice still going into the microphone as they pulled him down. The last thing I heard him say before they carried him away and his voice went silent was, I believe. I accept you, Isa. Forgive me. And then he was gone. Dragged out of sight. Within minutes, other voices came through the speakers. Official voices. Calm and controlled. They said the sheikh had suffered a medical emergency and was being taken for treatment. They said everyone should remain calm. They said other imams would lead the prayers and everyone should continue their worship. New imams appeared. The prayers resumed. Like nothing had happened. But something had happened. Everyone knew it. You could feel it in the air like electricity. You could see it on every face around you. Hundreds of thousands of people had just heard one of the most respected Islamic scholars in Saudi Arabia say that Jesus was the Son of God and his Savior. No announcement, no calm voice on a speaker was going to make that go away. My brother Rashid and I and our 2 friends walked back to our hotel in complete silence. Nobody said a word for a long time. When we got to our room and closed the door, Rashid was the first one to speak. He said the sheikh had been taken over by an evil spirit. He said that was the only possible explanation. A jinn, a demon, had entered the man and used his mouth to speak lies. Our friends immediately agreed. They seemed relieved to have an explanation. They talked about how powerful these spirits can be, how even the strongest believers could be attacked, how the holy month was actually a time when such attacks might increase. I listened. I said nothing, because I did not know what to say. I had known Sheikh Khalid by reputation for many years. I had heard him speak on recordings. I knew what kind of man he was. And what I saw on his face when he spoke those words was not a man who had lost control of his mind. It was not the face of someone who was confused or suffering. What I saw was a man who had become certain. Completely and totally certain. The way a man looks when he has been searching for something for a very long time and has finally found it. That face. I could not shake it. I tried to sleep that night. I could not. The next morning, we found out that the sheikh had been arrested. The official statement said he was receiving psychiatric care for a mental breakdown. There were clear and firm warnings going around that anyone who spread stories about what had happened would be causing problems for the community and should stop immediately. The message was simple. Be quiet. Accept the official story. Move on. But people were not moving on. In hotel lobbies, in whispered conversations in quiet corners of the mosque courtyard, in low voices between people who had been there, the only topic was what had happened. Most people, like Rashid and my friends, had settled on the jinn explanation. But I also heard other voices. People saying they could not stop thinking about it. People saying they did not know what to believe. People asking quiet questions that had no easy answers. And then I started hearing about other things. Rumors, passed carefully from person to person, that more experiences were happening. Not just in Mecca. Across Saudi Arabia. People were saying they were having dreams and visions of Jesus. That he was appearing to people and speaking to them. That it was not just the sheikh. That it was spreading. I told myself these were just stories. People getting caught up in the drama of the moment, imagining things, turning rumors into more rumors. I tried to be logical. But then, on the third night after the sheikh's declaration, something happened to me. I woke up at around 3 in the morning. Rashid was sleeping in the other bed. The room was dark, but there was a light that I cannot properly describe. It was not coming from the window. It was not the bathroom light. It was just there. A soft, steady light that seemed to come from inside the room itself. And then I saw him. A man. Standing at the foot of my bed. Wearing white clothes that seemed to glow from inside. His face was calm and kind but also powerful in a way that made me feel very small and very seen at the same time. His eyes were looking directly at me. And the feeling that came from him, I don't have the right words. It was love. But not normal love. Not the love of a parent or a friend. It was something bigger. Something that felt like it was reaching all the way into the parts of me I never showed anyone. I could not speak. I could not move. I just looked at him. And I knew. I did not need anyone to tell me. I knew exactly who this was. He spoke to me. Not in an audible voice like you would hear in a conversation. But directly into my mind and heart, in a way that was somehow clearer than spoken words. He told me he loved me. He told me he had always loved me. He showed me his hands, and I saw wounds there, scars that somehow looked both old and fresh at the same time. He told me that what happened to his hands happened because of me. Because of my sins. He said that the debt I owed before a holy God was one I could never pay myself. He said that he had paid it. That it was finished. That all I needed to do was believe and receive what he had already done. He told me I was not alone. He said that thousands of people across the world were having the same experience at the same time. He said he was calling people to himself. Not to a religion. To himself. Personally. One by one. And then he was gone. The light faded. The room was dark again. Rashid was still sleeping peacefully on the other side of the room. I lay there until morning. I did not sleep. I did not pray the dawn prayer. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, completely undone. I want to be honest about what I felt. I was terrified. Not of what I had seen, but of what it meant. Because if what I saw was real, then my whole life had been built on something incomplete. 55 years of prayers. 55 years of fasting and giving and trying to be good enough. And this person I had just encountered was telling me that none of that was ever going to be enough, but that he had already done what needed to be done. That it was a gift. Free. Already paid for. The idea was so foreign to everything I had been taught that part of me wanted to reject it completely. But I could not reject what I had just experienced. You can tell yourself a dream was just a dream. But what I experienced was more real than the bed I was lying on. I knew the difference. And I could not lie to myself about it. We left Mecca 2 days later and drove back home. During the drive, Rashid and the others talked about their spiritual highlights from the trip. They talked about prayers that had felt meaningful and the blessing of being in Mecca during Ramadan. Nobody mentioned Sheikh Khalid. Nobody mentioned the chaos of that night. It was like they had all decided together to put it in a box and leave it behind. I sat in the back seat and looked at the desert going past the window and said almost nothing the whole drive. When we arrived home, I stood outside my front door for a moment before going in. Through the window, I could see my wife Samira moving around the kitchen. I could hear the sound of my children somewhere inside. Everything looked so normal. So unchanged. And I was carrying something inside me that would change everything, and I did not yet know how to carry it or what to do with it. Samira knew immediately that something was wrong. She always knew. After 27 years of marriage, she could read me better than I could read myself. That evening, after the children were asleep, we sat in our room and I told her everything. The Sheikh's declaration. The rumors. My own experience in the hotel room. All of it. I watched her face as I talked. She went from concern to shock to something close to fear. When I finished, she was very quiet for a long time. Then she asked if I had told anyone else. I said no. She asked if I thought I might have been dreaming. I said no. I knew the difference. She asked what I planned to do. I said I did not know. Samira is a strong and practical woman. She told me that whatever I had experienced, whatever it meant, I needed to keep it completely secret. People were being arrested. The government was watching. If anyone found out I had claimed to see Jesus, I could lose my job, my freedom, possibly my life. Our children would suffer. Our family would be destroyed. She was not being cruel. She was being honest about the reality of where we lived. I knew she was right. And I promised her I would be careful. But keeping that secret was one of the hardest things I have ever done. I went to work every day. I sat in meetings. I talked to colleagues. I ate lunch and made normal conversation. I went to the mosque for Friday prayers and moved my lips with everyone else. And inside me, the whole time, something was burning. Something that needed to come out. Something that was changing the way I saw everything. Late at night, after Samira was asleep, I would use my phone and a private internet connection to search for news about what had happened in Mecca. The Saudi news said almost nothing. Just a brief mention of a sheikh who had a medical episode and was recovering. But on international news sites and on social media, the story was very much alive. There were accounts from people who had been in Mecca that night describing exactly what I had seen. And there were other accounts, from people across Saudi Arabia and other countries, describing their own encounters with Jesus. The accounts were so similar to mine that I could not breathe when I read them. Same description of the figure. Same message about grace and forgiveness and salvation being a gift. Same feeling of being overwhelmed by love. These were people who did not know each other. Who lived in different places. Who came from different backgrounds. And they were all describing the same person. I was not crazy. Or if I was, then thousands of other people were crazy in exactly the same way. About 2 weeks after coming home from Mecca, someone reached out to me. I will call him Dawood, though that is not his real name. He sent a message through an encrypted app asking if I had been in Mecca during the incident with the sheikh. He said he had gotten my contact through someone who knew someone who had been there. When I confirmed I had been there, he asked if we could meet privately. Every part of my logical brain said this could be a trap. This could be someone working for the government trying to identify people who had been affected by the Mecca events. I thought about Samira's warning. I thought about my children. But something else was there too. A feeling I had come to recognize since that night in the hotel room. A quiet inner certainty pointing me forward, telling me it was safe. I decided to trust it. We met at a small coffee shop in a part of Jeddah far from where either of us lived or worked. Dawood was a man in his late 50s, calm and well-dressed, with the kind of eyes that have seen a lot and understood most of it. We sat in a quiet corner and spoke very softly, both of us watching to make sure nobody was listening. He told me he had been in Mecca that night. He told me that he had also been near a second area of the Grand Mosque where a different imam had stopped mid-prayer and also declared seeing Jesus. This second incident had been shut down even faster than the first. But Dawood had been there. He had seen it. He had heard it. He told me he was part of a small group of people who had been quietly connecting with each other. People who had either witnessed the events in Mecca or had their own personal experiences with Jesus afterward. He asked me if I had experienced anything personally beyond what I witnessed with the sheikh. I thought about Samira's warning. I thought about the risk. Then I told him the truth. He reached across the table and held my hand. His eyes filled up with tears. He told me he had seen Jesus too. That Jesus had appeared to him 3 nights after the Mecca incident and had spoken to him about grace and forgiveness and had completely turned his understanding of God upside down. He said I was not alone. He said there were more of us than I could imagine. Over the weeks that followed, Dawood introduced me to others. We met in small groups, in private homes, in quiet locations where we could speak without fear of being heard. Every person I met had a story, different details, same truth. Encounters with Jesus that had broken them open and rebuilt them into something new. There was a woman named Hannah, a teacher, who had been praying at home when the room filled with light and Jesus told her she was loved without condition. There was a man named Bilal, a doctor, who saw Jesus in a hospital hallway and stood frozen while Jesus showed him wounds and said they were the price paid for Bilal's freedom. There was a young woman named Noor, a university student, who dreamed of Jesus 7 nights in a row, each night learning more about who he was and what he had done. Story after story, person after person, each one carrying the weight of a truth too big to keep inside and too dangerous to share openly. Dawood told me that based on what the network had gathered, at least 1,000 people had been arrested in the immediate weeks after the Mecca incident. But many more, possibly 10,000 or more, had simply kept their experiences secret out of fear. Some were released from detention after a period of time. The authorities had expected to treat them like mentally ill patients, but the doctors and psychiatrists working with these people kept finding the same thing. These were not mentally ill people. They were calm. They were rational. They were functional in every way. They just would not deny what they had seen. And something else was happening. Some of the medical staff working with the detained believers were starting to have their own experiences. A psychiatrist who had spent weeks trying to convince her patients their visions were not real went home one night and saw Jesus herself. She quit her job and started seeking out a community of believers. A nurse had an encounter with Jesus while giving medication to a patient who had been arrested for declaring she had seen the Messiah. The government could not keep these people locked up forever. There were too many of them and they kept not behaving like mentally ill people were supposed to behave. They were peaceful. They were joyful. They were not dangerous. So eventually, the authorities began releasing most of them, requiring them to sign papers saying their experiences were not real and to report for ongoing counseling. And then they let them go. What happened next was something the government probably did not plan for. All those people who had been isolated with their experiences, thinking they were alone or losing their minds, went back to their communities and found each other. The underground network grew fast. People who had been silently carrying their secrets suddenly discovered hundreds of others who had the same secret. The sense of relief and belonging this brought was powerful in a way I cannot properly explain. I met some of the people who had been detained and released. They told me about the interrogations, the pressure to deny what they had seen, the medications meant to dull their memories, the isolation and the threats. Hard experiences. But they all said the same thing. Even in those facilities, even under the worst treatment, they felt something that should not have been possible to feel. A deep, steady, unshakable peace. Like someone was with them in the room. Someone who had told them this might happen and promised not to leave them. One man I met, a former imam from a mosque in Jeddah, I will call him Majid. He had been leading Friday prayers when he saw Jesus standing at the back of the mosque. He stopped his sermon and told his congregation exactly what he was seeing. He was arrested before he had finished 2 sentences. He spent 3 weeks in a psychiatric facility. He was pressured daily to recant what he had said. He refused every time. While he was in detention, he quietly shared his experience with other patients. 7 of them, people who had also had encounters with Jesus but were beginning to doubt themselves under the pressure and medication, those 7 people, Majid helped them hold onto what they had seen. He prayed with them. He reminded them of the peace they had felt. By the time he was released, all 7 of them had committed themselves fully to following Jesus, and they became the core of a small underground group that met weekly in Majid's home. About 2 months after my experience in Mecca, Dawood told me about a special gathering that was being planned. Around 40 believers had decided they were ready to take a formal step of publicly declaring their faith through baptism. He asked if I wanted to be part of it. I spent several days thinking about this. I knew what it meant. There was no undoing baptism. It was a public declaration, even if only witnessed by a small private group. In the eyes of Islamic law, I would be an apostate. The word itself was terrifying. Apostasy in Saudi Arabia could mean death. It would certainly mean the loss of everything I had built. My job. My standing in the community. Possibly my family. But I also could not keep going the way I was going. Living one life on the outside and another life on the inside. Performing prayers I no longer believed in, going through rituals that felt empty, pretending to be something I had stopped being the night Jesus stood at the foot of my bed. I told Samira about the invitation. She was frightened. She held my hands and asked me not to do anything that would put our family at risk. But as I looked at her face, I could see that she already knew. She knew me. And she could see that I had already made my decision in my heart. I asked her if she wanted me to share with her everything I had learned about Jesus. Everything he had shown me and told me. About grace. About forgiveness. About the difference between trying to earn God's approval and simply receiving his love. To my surprise, she said yes. Over the next several evenings, we sat together and I told her everything. I shared the testimonies I had read and heard from others in the network. I explained what Jesus said about salvation being a gift and not a reward. I told her about his death and resurrection, not as a distant historical fact, but as something personal and real. I let her read accounts from people who had encountered him and been changed. Samira did not have a dramatic vision like I did. She told me that was not how it happened for her. She said that as I talked, something began to shift in her heart. She said she had spent her whole life as a Muslim woman carrying a heavy burden of worry that she was never good enough. That God was always watching her failures and adding them up. The idea that Jesus offered forgiveness freely, not as a reward for being good enough but as a gift from someone who loved her, brought her a relief she said she had never felt before in her life. 3 days before the baptism gathering, Samira told me she was coming with me. She said we were one family and she would not let me walk this road alone. We would walk it together. I am not embarrassed to tell you that I cried when she said that. The night of the baptism gathering, we told our children we were going to visit friends and would be back late. We drove for over an hour, following directions Dawood had given me, out into the desert, until we reached a private compound that belonged to a Christian businessman. Cars were parked around it, hidden as much as possible from the road. When we went inside, I stopped walking for a moment. Dawood had said around 40 people. But I counted far more than that. There were at least 70 people inside that compound. Some I recognized from smaller meetings. Many I had never seen before. They had come from Jeddah and Mecca and Medina, and some had driven 6 hours from Riyadh just to be there. Men and women. Young and old. Professionals and laborers. All people who had been Muslims their whole lives and had encountered something that changed everything. A Pakistani pastor who had been leading an underground church for foreign workers in Jeddah for 15 years was there to lead the baptisms. He was a small, quiet man with a gentle manner. He had been doing this kind of work in secret for a long time and he understood the risk better than anyone in the room. Before the baptisms, he asked if anyone wanted to share their story. Person after person stood up. Each one told a version of the same truth. An encounter with Jesus that they had not looked for and had not expected. A message of grace that turned everything they thought they knew upside down. A peace and certainty that had stayed with them even through fear and pressure and loss. One woman stood and said she had been on the edge of ending her life. She had been carrying guilt from things in her past that she believed God would never forgive. Jesus appeared to her and told her that all of it was washed away. That she was clean. That she was loved. She was weeping as she said it, not from sadness but from the shock of still being amazed that something so complete was possible. A young man said he had been a strict and judgmental Muslim. He had looked down on people who did not follow every rule exactly right. Jesus appeared to him and asked him why he was working so hard to earn something that was already being freely offered. The young man said learning to receive grace rather than earn it was still the hardest thing he was doing every day. An older man, probably close to my age, stood with tears running down his face and said he had memorized the Quran, had made the pilgrimage to Mecca 4 times, had prayed every required prayer for 40 years, and had never once felt close to God. He said that in one encounter with Jesus he experienced more of God's real presence and love than in 4 decades of religious practice. He said he only wished he had known this truth when he was younger. When the pastor asked me to share, I stood up with Samira beside me holding my hand. I told them about witnessing Sheikh Khalid's declaration in Mecca, about my own experience in the hotel room, about the months of confusion and searching, about my wife, who had come to believe not through a vision but through hearing the truth and feeling something shift in her heart, and about the decision we had made, together, to stop living in the middle. After I sat down, several people came and held our hands and welcomed us. There was something in that room I had not felt before. Not the powerful communal feeling of the Grand Mosque with its millions of people. Something smaller and warmer than that. The feeling of people who had paid a cost to be in the same room together and were glad they had paid it. The baptisms took place in a large pool in the outdoor part of the compound. The pastor stood in the water and explained what baptism meant. He said it was an outward sign of an inward change. That going under the water was like dying to the old life and coming up was like being raised into something new. He said it was our public declaration that we belonged to Jesus. One by one, people went into the water. I watched person after person go under and come back up. Some were crying. Some were laughing. Some looked completely overwhelmed. But all of them, every single one, came up with a look on their face that I recognized. The same look I had seen on Sheikh Khalid's face in the Grand Mosque. That look of total certainty. Of having arrived somewhere after a very long time of being lost. When it was my turn, I walked into the water with Samira beside me. The pastor said the words. I went under. The water closed over me. And for 1 second, in the silence under the water, something let go in me. Something I had been carrying for 55 years without knowing I was carrying it. The weight of trying to be good enough. The fear of not measuring up. The emptiness of knocking on a door that never opened.